So, Berto, Shia LaBeouf, what do you know about his antics?
Shia LaBeouf. You know what? Well, first of all, the first time I remember Shia LaBeouf, wasn't he in a movie called Suburbia or something?
I don't know.
It was like a kind of a horror movie. And then the next thing I knew was like Transformers, and then the next thing I knew was Indiana Jones, which I won't speak of. But then for a little while, I started really respecting him because I would see him do all these little artsy projects. And so that's what I would see through the grapevine. You know, he'd do like all these creative things, which reminded me a lot of Joaquin Phoenix or, stuff like that, where it's totally out there, but it's very brave, if you will. He also appeared in a video, Sia video, which I liked. And it was also another very brave performance in that.
He was on track to become the next Tom Hanks or something,
or even more because Tom doesn't. Yeah, exactly. But I thought, okay, this is good because he got his brand blockbuster stuff out of the way, and now he's going in an artsy direction. Right. I like this.
Yeah.
And then I started hearing / seeing arrests and alleged battering and abuse and fights and then I was like, oh, what's going on? Because then I went from thinking, because with some of the artsy stuff, I was already thinking, okay, he seems a little maybe touched, like as in maybe he's working through some stuff, but oh, good, he's using art to do it. Okay. And then it was like, oh, wait, no, okay, something else is going on. And I didn't really know how much of an alcoholic he was. I just knew that he was getting in so much trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I thought we'd do an episode about him because the movie Honey Boy.
Right, which you told me to watch. And at the time you told me, I had not heard of it. Or I maybe heard of it, but I had no idea that he was in it. I certainly did not know it was about him, his life or anything. I had no knowledge. So it was, as I was watching the movie, I slowly started thinking to myself, I wonder if this is semi-autobiographical.
Yeah. Because
I didn't even know he was in Even Stevens or whatever that is.
Yeah.
So it was a discovery for me.
Yeah.
It really, well, I won't spoil the party, but I loved the movie and it was really interesting experience.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to get into today. I want to talk about the psychology of Shia LaBeouf because there's a fair amount that we can get into. He's pretty honest in interviews, and the movie Honey Boy gives us an insight into at least how he sees his childhood. What do you say, Berto? Let's talk about it.
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
And my name is Humberto Castañeda, and I fabricate fiberglass foam rollers.
So, timeline, 1986, he's born in LA. And in his childhood, what do you know about his childhood? And spoiler alert for Honey Boy, which you can't really spoil because this doesn't really have a plot exactly. It's about his childhood. He basically wrote and I think directed this movie that...
I don't know if he directed it. He definitely wrote it.
He wrote it, and he plays his father.
He might have directed it.
He plays his... It's semi-autobiographical. It's not actual autobiographical.
Yeah, because it's different names and things like that, but a lot of his own experiences.
But it's obviously exactly from his life.
Yeah, exactly.
And he plays his dad, and this other kid actor plays him when he was a kid as he was an up-and-coming actor.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, like, I knew nothing about his childhood. I had heard of the show Even Stevens, never watched an episode, didn't know who was in it.
But it was for kids, that show.
Yeah, well, and at a time where I was no longer a kid. So, right. And so therefore, when the movie starts and they're showing us, I was a little confused when the movie first started because I didn't know, is this a flashback? Like, what's happening? But when they showed us the kid actor, I hadn't yet put two and two together. I just thought, okay, this is an interesting story. It was later in the movie where I started thinking, wait a minute. Because then there were other little things where I'm like, oh, is this about his career?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew from the beginning, so I was like watching that.
So I didn't know anything about his childhood.
Yeah. Right. So he grew up in poverty. His parents divorced eventually. His father suffered from PTSD from the Vietnam War.
Oh, from Vietnam, okay.
Some pretty classic severe war PTSD. He struggled with heroin addiction. The father, which a lot of trauma sufferers will turn to as a way of
did they show that? And I don't remember if they
he went to AA meetings.
Oh, the AA. I thought it was like alcoholism, but okay.
And then he had a bender. He went on he had a relapse.
Right, that's true. Yeah. Oh, you're right. Yeah, he does talk about it.
Yeah. Shia LaBeouf says that his dad was verbally and mentally abusive and physically abusive. And one time he pointed a gun at him during a Vietnam War flashback, according to him. And they kind of depict that pretty well in the movie Honey Boy.
You know, some of those scenes were so good, so well made, and so difficult because the father, the boy is what, 12 or something? And the father is saying these things that are bordering on, you know, a father just having a conversation with his son and telling him, hey, you know, you got to be tough in life sometimes. But it like dips into these like abusive rants about him and about how weak he is and about how he's not like him and all these things. And he, you know, the little kid is just kind of like taking it and kind of, you know, ignoring it because he loves his dad and he wants to be with his dad.
Right.
That must have been so hard to write emotionally. I mean, you know, and of course the craft of writing, but the emotional part.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that the main thesis of the movie is just what you described, is a father who is on the narcissistic side, on the insecure side, on the disheveled side of life, and is very frequently pushing his child to act, on one hand, pushing his child to act in these various productions, but also helping him with his acting.
Right.
Shia LaBeouf said that his father, he wouldn't be an actor if it wasn't for his father teaching him how to be an actor.
And they show scenes where it was so well done again, like these little, like the whole scene with like, flare your nostrils. I thought that scene was meant to be like how out of touch his father was sometimes because he was like in a rodeo or something. And they show the kid like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But then he like does. And then I read later that actually like that was a thing that Shia LaBeouf did in the show. That was kind of like a gimmick of his character. So it actually, what he did receive interesting advice that seemed not, the other scenes that also you could see from both sides, when the father's being super overprotective, like, no, I'm going to be the bad guy. We're going right now. You said this was going to end in 1 hour. I'm taking him. And now if you look at it from the context of the movie, you're like, oh, wow, he's just so violent, so aggressive. The flip side is if you know anything about Hollywood and about how they abuse kids, both literally and figuratively, you need someone like that. You need a bit of a tiger dad in that situation or mom to be like, nope, we're going.
Yeah, it was such a rich character that LaBeouf wrote for his father.
Yeah.
On one hand, you hated him. On the other hand, you felt bad for him and kind of liked him.
And by the way, that he played so... Because it's... First of all, I was thinking, it's hard to make a Hollywood actor look bad normally.
Yeah.
You see the Christian Bales, they go to like extremes, like I'll lose 100 pounds.
Yeah.
But normally, because they're so good looking and well...
Or the Charlize Theron in that one movie.
Yeah, or Monster... not Monster, the other... Yeah. But anyways, in this one... At first, I wasn't kind of buying the look because I'm like, well, you just grew a mullet. It's still Shia LaBeouf. But I'm like, well, did he gain weight? It doesn't matter. He pushed through that disconnect. And as soon as he was acting, I was like, okay, I'm buying this character.
Yeah, I consider LaBeouf to be one of the best actors of our time.
Yeah.
You know, top 20 actors or something. And this movie demonstrates that because... you can't get away from it's LaBeouf, Shia LaBeouf. But in this movie, right away, you're convinced this is we're watching this random guy that I don't know be a dick to his son. You know,
it's a very subtle art because so you take someone like Keanu Reeves. I just rewatched Point Break because it was the 30-year anniversary.
I rewatched it too. God, that movie has some great scenes and some terrible scenes.
I know, but it's fun. But
and
listen,
why? I love Keanu. He's a fellow Hapa brother, but he is a terrible actor.
Right, and that's the thing, because Keanu, no matter what he does, like, look, I enjoy...
Bill and Ted's great.
Right. I enjoy watching Keanu, especially Matrix, Bill and Ted's. But you can't ever get away from, like, that's Keanu Reeves.
Yeah.
He's Keanu Reeves. And you have a little bit of this.
Swayze is amazing.
And Swayze is, when you watch the two of them side by side, what a masterclass comparatively, right? Okay. You have a similar effect, and I've gotten in debates about this too. I felt that way about Johnny Depp to a certain extent.
No, I think he's really good.
I know, I've had this debate. There are some roles that he's done which absolutely every credit. A lot of roles, though, for me, and this is just my opinion, nowhere near as much, but I always like, okay, that's Johnny Depp.
Yeah, you're right. There's like Fear and Loathing. I don't like that movie. I don't like him in that movie.
Because it's a little bit like that. It's like, okay, it's Johnny Depp doing the little impersonation.
Or Willy Wonka. Yeah.
But then there are some roles that legitimately you have to hand it to him.
Yeah.
Now, you don't get that with DiCaprio. You don't get that with this guy, Shia LaBeouf. Yeah. You get full immersion.
Right.
DiCaprio, I was the biggest naysayer at first because of Titanic. And not because Titanic wasn't technically an enjoyable movie. It's just that it was so overblown that I was like, oh, I can't stand this DiCaprio guy. And someone's like, oh, have you seen The Island? I'm like, oh, what? No, I'm not going to watch. Turns out it's an entertaining movie. Then he starts making all these awesome movies where every time he acts, you're like engrossed in it.
Yeah.
And then Shia LaBeouf is to me that thing where he came from doesn't represent what he's capable of.
Right. Which he gets into in some interviews, which I'll get into later, about him feeling at odds with his mainstream kind of plastic acting jobs that he's getting. But anyway, other things from his childhood. Shia LaBeouf overheard a man raping his mother.
What?
When he was a child. Yeah.
No.
And
oh my God.
He says in a quote, "I froze, the man ran out, and my mom ran after him. And there was violence. The rapist ran off and was never found. And he said that he became unruly at school after that."
Yeah.
Yeah. So in summary of his childhood, there's probably a lot of chaos. I mean, we're just hearing the tip of the iceberg, probably. There's probably a lot of violence, sexual assault, a lot of feelings of danger, uncertainty, powerlessness.
Yeah.
I think a theme of powerlessness, not only from the chaos, but also from his dad making him feel like a powerless, impotent little child,
Literally, because he would always be like, "That's how you pee?"
Right. Yeah.
Like he was literally like putting his manhood down.
I know.
It was so brutal. And it was... there's these things where...
And you got to figure that the dad came from a similar father himself.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
There's these things where a parent or someone who's really close to you can do and say that cut you to the bone.
Yeah.
Something like, you'll never amount to anything. Or,
right.
As an example, and I don't mean to...
Or body shaming.
Or body shaming. I don't mean to single her out, my poor mom. But when I was in high school, I was practicing piano and singing, and she was upstairs, and she yells down, "Will you stop that infernal racket?" And to this day, I remember that moment.
Yeah.
And it cut me deep.
Yeah.
Because those aren't just things that anyone out on the streets said to you. They're the people that you care the most about, the people that represent the world. So now in the moment, I'm sure she was frustrated. Who knows what was going on? She just literally meant she didn't want to hear the noise. But what it said to me was, I will never amount to anything. I'm not worth it. I'm certainly no musician. Like, that's all the things packaged in that little moment.
Yeah.
So when the little kid is being told any of those things, like, oh, your manhood is flawed, or you don't do this, or it's just like, you'll never amount to anything. You're nothing.
Right. Times that moment that you had with your mom times 1,000.
All the time.
And that's what Shia LaBeouf
Yeah, constantly.
Yeah. Right. It gets under your skin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, year 2000, he's now in his early teens. This is when Honey Boy is taking place. He starts acting. He's in the Disney show called Even Stevens. Then he's in Holes in 2003 when he's like 15-ish or something, which is a huge movie. And this is when I first heard of him. I've never seen that movie.
I remember the name Holes. I just never saw it.
It was a huge kids movie. It
was based on a book, I think.
Yeah, perhaps. In 2005, he voiced the boy in Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind.
Oh, I think I knew that, but...
And he was Keanu's driver in Constantine. Actually, I liked Keanu in Constantine.
Yeah.
And
there's some roles where he actually is just measured enough.
Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, The Matrix used them so effectively.
Right, exactly. And... but yeah, so LaBeouf was in Constantine as Keanu's driver, so that would have been the first time that I had seen him. And then age 21, 2007, he's in Transformers. So at this point, he's huge. He is the next Hollywood darling, essentially. And probably an instant millionaire because they probably signed him up for a bunch of movies.
Huge breakout for him.
So around this time, he, I think on his 21st birthday, he got really hammered.
Sorry, it was Disturbia. Oh. Did you ever see that?
No.
It was a surprisingly entertaining movie, sort of based on Rear Window. Not based, but like inspired by Rear Window. Oh. Anyways, he's in this kind of neighborhood where a lot of bad stuff is happening. I don't remember the details, but I saw him in that. This was before Transformers, and I thought, I like him, and I like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has an appeal about him. There's sort of a weird charisma that it's hard to explain. Because he doesn't, if you look at him, you wouldn't think, oh, there's a charismatic guy, but there's just something about him that is
his
highly
looks are
charismatic.
traditional. His looks aren't as good looking as some of the other guys. I mean, he's a good looking guy, but he's not.
He's not a DiCaprio.
Exactly. He's not as whatever you want to.
He's not a Keanu.
So it's a little more relatable in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's also just something about the way he moves and talks and just is, he probably got it from his dad. His dad, I think, was charismatic. But anyway, so this is the first one of his antics. He's 21 and he was arrested at 2:30 in the morning at a Chicago Walgreens. He was, drunk and disorderly and refusing to leave the store. The security guard said that he was really drunk and being disruptive, and he was charged with criminal trespassing because he refused to leave the store, and the store later dropped the charges.
By the way, I have no legs or footing to look at those stories and be like, I had so many chaotic, drunkenly situations, including one time Halloween. I was in a club at a bar in UW with our friend Eric, and I was pretty hammered.
Which bar?
I don't remember anymore, but they were having a costume contest. And I didn't have a costume on me, but I wanted to go on stage because I'm a narcissist.
Oh my God.
And I was talking to some of the girls there, and I was in that mood. I was on that night, so I was having like a little rapport, and I had like this little cadre of like 3 gals I was talking to. And I'm like, I'm going to go on stage. And like, if you don't have a costume, I'm like, that's okay. I'm college dude. And I'm doing air quotes here. College dude. And they thought it was the funniest thing. So I'm like, I'm going on. All right. So I go up on stage and they're cheering me on. Meanwhile, my friend Eric is on the other side of the bar talking to someone else, unaware of this. And I go up and I'm like, I'm here for the contest. And the dude that's moderating it, the MC, he's like, you don't have a costume. You can't participate. I'm like, no, I'm college, dude. Then I'm sorry, you can't. Well, look, they want me to be. And they're like, let him do it. He's like, no, you don't. You need a costume. So then he turns around and I will regret this forever because what a dick. I grab my drink. My full drink, and I dump it down his back. There's your Berto for you. Anyone of Berto lovers out there, that's what Berto did when he was 21 or 22 or whatever. That's what he did.
You haven't told me that. I remember you telling me that.
I told you a long time ago. But that's what I did. And so guess what? So the guy turns around, and of course he's working for the club, so he doesn't swing at me, but he shoves me off the stage. And I don't know how I land on both feet, because I was pretty drunk, but I land on both feet laughing my ass off, and all the girls are like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Of course the bouncers come and escort me out, and I don't know why they didn't beat me up. Probably didn't want to get sued, but that was one of those moments that someone can get arrested or you can get beat up really badly, whatever. Someone came and tapped my friend Eric on the shoulder. Hey, you gotta go. Why? Your buddy just did something really bad. You gotta go. And they didn't tell him what, so until he got outside and we talked, he was like, what the hell did you do?
What did you think when you woke up the next day?
Honestly, at that age, I still thought it was hilarious. I was a lot less, now that I look back, a lot less empathetic in some ways. That's weird. But it took me a lot of drunken times for me to start realizing that when I was drunk, there were often times where I would do some very mean things or irresponsible things.
Well, one could say you come from a similar background as Shia LaBeouf.
There is definitely a lot of similarity in that I'm a famous Hollywood star.
Well, that you had a dad that would lecture you all the time. Yeah. You had parents that would put you down.
Oh, and actually, it's sort of, I have, the dad role in this case was the dad who was always telling me how amazing I was and how he was basically putting the hopes of the universe on me. And I had another parent that would often put me down, and actually a whole side of the family, because you've seen a little bit of that. Like my whole mom's side of the family is a very opinionated, very biting side of the family.
Kind of uppity. And so, anyways, the point is, yeah, I had plenty of mixed things in there. Well, if you wrote Your Honey Boy, and there was that scene where you're dumping the drink down the guy's back, what would that be motivated by regarding your childhood?
That's a great question. I had never actually thought of that. In all these times I've told that story, I've never asked myself, why did I do that? Because the obvious answer is I was drunk. But whoa, I wouldn't do that today.
Right.
That's a great question. So I was being told no. I was being told, you don't belong here. And that's some deep wounds, right? That has my mom leaving. I don't belong with her. She doesn't belong with me. It has me moving back and forth between Colombia and the States because I need to move, and therefore I don't belong where I was. Me coming to new schools and not belonging. Me not being from the wealthy side of the tracks and therefore not belonging in those circles all the time. And so I there's probably more, but there's a lot of things there that where I had this feeling of like, you don't control me. You don't tell me what I can and can't do. I will show the world. And so, oh, okay, you told me I can't be in this contest. Well, I'm going to dump this on your back and prove it to the universe that I can be on this stage. Plus, I was showing off for the girls, which was...
And what's going on there? Like, what's the desperation there?
Yeah, so I'm trying to impress females in a chaotic manner.
To gain approval?
To gain approval, yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And I need not the approval of one by talking to her and maybe getting to know her. I need every female's approval.
Right. Because one, your mom abandoned you when you were 4.
And she is every woman in the world to me.
And 2, your dad told you should seek approval by everyone because you're capable of that.
Because I am. He also told me, yeah, exactly. That's right. So there's combinations of factors. So in that moment, I'm like, well, first of all, I can't look bad in front of these women because I need not one of I need all of them to like love me, adore me, never leave me. So I need to impress them. I need to do something dramatic like they do in the movies. And this guy is not going to tell me I can't rule the world. And I need to show him that I absolutely belong on this stage and every stage. And the only way to do that is to dump this drink on his back.
Right.
So if you're out there and you're listening and this happened to you, from the bottom of my heart, I apologize. I am sorry you didn't get your chance to like get even. You did push me off the stage. I could have broken my ankle, but whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting parallel. I didn't think we'd go here with Shia LaBeouf. That was after, and we'll get into more of the details of his life. That's what I think he, in part, and was depicted in Honey Boy, suffering from is this deep insecurity that he's trying to correct for through being in movies and TV and stuff, but also he's suffering all day long, and he drinks as a way of trying to cope with that suffering. And then when he's drunk, it exaggerates these qualities that are not very polite.
Yeah. So that's my point, is I could sit here and say, oh, geez, how dysfunctional. I'm not even a Hollywood star and I was doing these things, right? So it's not... these things happen to young people with trauma and hurt all the time.
Yes. So then 2008, he is 22, and he is now in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Gray Skull.
On. Can we avoid it? Can we just say he was in a movie with Harrison Ford?
But I think it's important to point this out because at this point, he is a humongous star. He's all transformed up. He's the next Harrison Ford, and he's Hollywood darling. All the Steven Spielberg, whoever does the Transformer movies, what's his face? And they're gonna
Michael Bay. But they're gonna take over the franchise with him. That's like, you're the new, literally the new face of the Indiana Jones franchise.
Right. Lots of money, all the fame, and he hates himself on the inside though.
And the movie is critically panned, so that must have been tough.
Right. And the movie is critically and fan hated.
Yeah.
And he is the main focus. Like,
which is unfortunate because
it's not his fault.
No, in fact, if you watch it, there are very few things in that movie that are even watchable. And I'm not defending the monkey swinging from the vines, but that's not his fault. Every scene he talks in and participates in, he adds to the movie, not subtracts.
Yeah, Harrison Ford doesn't add much.
Doesn't, no. And what's her name? Sadly, Margot, is it? Whatever her name was.
Well, Catherine.
The main actress that played Marion in the old movies.
Oh,
it's not Margot Kidder. It's
something.
Whatever her name is. Sadly, at this point in her career, was not pulling.
Right. None of them were. Even Catherine, what's her face, wasn't very compelling. So I think that if I would just speculate based on the little bit I know about his life, he hates himself. Now the world hates him, and he's struggling with, okay, what kind of identity do I have? I want to make good art, but I also am now this huge star, which I didn't think would happen. I have the voice of my father in me.
Yeah.
I hate myself, all that kind of stuff. Then we skip forward a couple years, 2012, and he reportedly got, and these are just the things that get reported, right? But on the set of Lawless with Tom Hardy, he got drunk and reportedly knocked him out. But he and Tom Hardy said that they were just play fighting a lot. But
I heard both stories, yes.
Right. So on one hand, I think it's possible that he did get drunk and punched Tom Hardy and knocked him out, which is pretty awful. And they just covered it up in the press. Or it was sensationalized that him and Tom Hardy were just play fighting. Who knows? But he started getting tired of being in mainstream movies at this point. And he says, quote, "They felt dated as fuck. You come up on these stories like Easy Rider and Raging Bull and De Niro and Scorsese and Hopper, and you find value in what they do. Meanwhile, you're chasing energon crystals. Is that how you say the Transformers?
I have no idea.
Energon crystals or whatever?
I have no idea.
And he said he had two ways of coping with this. One is drinking a lot, and two was going full method in his acting. He says, "My way of running is to drink. I'm a good old fashioned drunk, whiskey and beer, and have been since I touched alcohol." So I'm guessing that because of his trauma, multiple traumas growing up and a lot of PTSD, the alcohol, once he started drinking, made him feel okay and normal and calm for the first time. And that's why he kept drinking. And I'll get more into, at the very end of me reviewing his whole life, I'm going to get into my hypothesis as to what's going on with his psychology. But anyway, and then the other way that he copes is going full method. Why do you think going full method would help him, Bruno?
Well, so I think, first of all, there is a lot of cachet. There's a lot of historical context around actors that were revered and they would go full method, like Marlon Brando, right? And there's something to it when done right. Like, you see that and you're like, wow, what a commitment to that role. Like I was saying, Christian Bale literally starving himself to play someone who starves themselves, right? You're like, wow, that's commitment. Okay. So even if you're playing a role in a movie that maybe is not, super artsy or whatever, you can be like, well, at least I will be the full highlight and they will believe my character. And so it's some amount of control within having not as much control over his career.
Yeah, it's good. My speculation is that it's losing the self. When you drink or dive into some art form or play full method on camera, and because I think when he says going full method, I think he means when the camera stopped rolling, he still stays in his character, and it's a way of avoiding.
I could see that. At the same time, for a craft, you could do that with almost any craft, right? Like, I've done this for sure, where as an example, in 2000, I was working at something at work, and I spent 2 days in a row, no sleep, just working on it, and it was not healthy. It was not healthy, but I look back, I'm like, why did I do that? Why, these foam rollers build themselves almost, especially with the way we build them with cheap components, stuff. So why did I spend so much time spending all the, and I must have been escaping, escaping into the work.
Well, I think it's twofold. One is you go into a flow state and it's euphoric.
Yeah.
You know what that's like with music and other kinds of things. You get in a flow state and it's just like euphoria, or at the very least, you forget about all your troubles because you're engrossed in a task.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps to avoid, if you hate yourself and you hate your life.
And coupled with what you're saying, that in the method acting on top of that, he's becoming someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
and you can hide within a different persona, which I think that some of the best actors are like that. Tom Cruise seems like he's a candidate for that too.
It's funny. It's funny you mention him. He's someone that is always Tom Cruise, and yet he is fully believable in whatever he does. Now, he picks the right roles to be believable.
Right.
In fact, there's only a couple exceptions to that rule that I can think of. There was the one where he played the hitman. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
That one was
Collateral.
It was a good movie, but I actually bought him less than normal in that movie. He didn't do a bad job. It's just like, for some reason, he was on the edge for me. But whatever. The point is, that guy goes full in.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if he stays in character after or whatever. I don't know. But while cameras are rolling, you cannot do anything but believe that that's the person.
Right.
And so there's an intensity to it, and I could imagine that there's a bit of an escape there as well, and a little bit of like, I'm becoming someone else.
Well, if you hate yourself, what better thing to do than to become someone else for a while, right? Yeah. And people do this sometimes in other arenas, like if, did you ever do this, Berto? Like you maybe even did it that night where you go out at night, you go to a bar, and you just want to become smooth guy at a bar.
Yeah, I've actually, there's a few different options or examples of that for me. One is what you're saying. You've seen me do that. You've seen me be in that mode. And now sometimes it's kind of hard because from the outside looking in, especially as you were getting to know me, there's a part of this like, well, that's how Berto is. He's just like fun, and we're out and he's fun and he's improvising and stuff. True. And I'm also escaping.
Right.
And I'm becoming someone else.
Right.
True. I've also done it. I mentioned this the other day. It was walking late at night at Seattle, like at 2 a.m. in the morning, drunk, and convincing myself I am a serial killer. I'm going to be a serial killer, and I'm going to walk these streets dangerously, and I'm going to look at people in an evil way for self-protection. But there's a little bit more to it. There's this horrible, again, stories to love Berto by. Horrible story where I was really, really drunk and I was walking. It was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and I saw a man that must have been homeless. I'm sure he was. He was probably high on something. And I come up towards him, and he was saying something disassociated to me, like he wasn't making sense. And as a method of self-defense, I got so angry at him. And I started, speaking of pointing your finger, I started pointing my finger in his face, super angry, and threatening him and telling him that he is not my father.
Oh yeah, you told me this.
Remember this? And I was so aggressive and so threatening. I probably re-traumatized or did some mental damage to this guy.
Where was that coming from psychologically?
I was trying to defend myself because I felt that I was vulnerable. I was at 3 a.m. in the morning, drunk. In reality, I was intoxicated enough that if I had gotten in a fight, I probably wouldn't have done very well, or would have really harmed someone. Because I've done that to trees before, where I like destroyed a tree one time. It's a small tree, I'm not King Kong here, but there was a small tree, and I was so upset at my mom that and I was drunk, that I just tore its limbs apart. And it's scary, man. It's so scary.
Right. So imagine if you're famous.
Yeah.
And someone has a cell phone camera and films you.
Yeah.
And puts that on the internet.
Yeah.
And then you're in the midst.
Every green activist group will be like, this guy killed a tree, And by the way, I went back, still drunk. I went back and cried and apologized to the tree for like 2 hours because it was so horrific to me what I had done. And it was so scary. It was so scary.
Right. Well, both incidents are examples of identifying with the abuser and becoming the abuser, making someone else feel the way you felt.
Yep.
And not pretty.
Oh, right. Because I remember with the homeless person, he was asking, whether he was asking me for money or not, he was saying disassociated things. Like, he wasn't making any sense, but I felt the sense of need. And so all this anger welled up in me because I was like, I already take care of my father. You're not my father. So it wasn't like I was delusional, like, I think you're my father. It wasn't that. It was actually, I was trying to, in my rage, tell him like, oh, I remember now. In my mind, I was trying to help him. That's what it was. I was thinking, I'm going to scare him straight. Obviously, this is completely crazy thinking by my part, but I was thinking, I'm going to scare him straight. I'm going to scare him. But I'm in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to convey to him that he is not powerless and that he can get himself out of this. But then the rage escalated to a point where I couldn't really control it. And then since the guy was also not there, he was really, I could look at it, I could see it in his eyes how confused and scared he was by this, but he kept saying things. And so like it escalated, and then I was like, yelling at him about him not being my father, and I shouldn't have to take care of you. You can do this. You can get yourself. It was like that. I didn't lay any hands on him, but I was sure, like, I mean, it's bad. It's sad, hard, scary to think about.
Yeah.
It's just, and again, I'm not famous. This was not me spending my millions on drugs. This was just me with alcohol exercising my demons.
Right. You're a good person. You've always been a good person. You've been less mature than you are now in the past, but you've always been, a good human being.
And really susceptible without knowing. I didn't know how susceptible I was to both. This is why, I didn't know how susceptible I was to abusing alcohol, for example. And I didn't know how susceptible I was to, while I was doing that, raging or being super depressed or being abusive to myself or other. Like, I didn't know that.
Right. And even if you did, what do you do about it?
Yeah.
Even if you go to therapy, it takes years.
And as you know, as you're first growing up with alcohol, you're told by your friends, by society and everything, that all these little stories are actually funny stories.
Right.
These are, oh, dude, you won't believe what I got up to. Oh, it was crazy. That's the story. That's the narrative.
Right.
So it's not a problem to solve. It's just another crazy story that happened. Man, maybe I shouldn't drink so much next time.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue with Shia LaBeouf's story and ending with my conceptualization of a psychology. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. We are trying to get everyone to become annual patrons of the podcast. So if you're a current patron or not a patron, become an annual patron and you get a discount and we benefit by being able to plan for our future. All right, so let's go to 2013. By this point, he is in his mid-20s, I'm thinking. Or wait, 30, maybe 31-ish. So I don't know how, mid-20s. During the making of Charlie Countryman, which I haven't seen, he choked the director.
Wow. I didn't know about that one.
He was also charged with plagiarism by several journalists.
I did know about that one.
What do you know about that?
I know he made like a short film or something where he was apparently copying text and reading it, but his explanation, I don't know, I haven't seen it, I don't know everything, but his explanation was that he was inspired by, but apparently he was a little too inspired by.
Right. So my impression of what happened was he was trying to create something of his own, and he was trying to break free of the Transformers, ball and chain, and he was taking some shortcuts by plagiarizing, but maybe not thinking he was plagiarizing. And when he was caught plagiarizing, I think all of us have had experiences like this where we're young and insecure and we're cutting corners and we're trying to be impressive to people. And we don't think hard enough about, am I copying too much of someone else's stuff right now?
There is that. And there's also I'm an artist and I am inspired by what I know. And there's the George Lucas where you can see direct scene by scene things that he took from other places.
But from what I understand, the Shia LaBeouf thing was
it more direct?
It was very direct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm imagining him in the situation, given his psychology and his rage, his internal anger at the world and his self-hatred. So he has self-hatred and all this shame from the world. He put himself out there, his first attempts at art, really, of him creating something. He gets slapped in the face and he self-loathes, but also comes out real angry. And in all of his weird machinations as he's figuring out what to do, he apologizes, but he plagiarized a Yahoo Answers apology.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
But he did it on purpose.
Oh, I see. Was it like a joke part at that point?
Right. So now, because I think this is total speculation. I think what he was thinking was, if I make it seem like I was trying to plagiarize all along,
right,
then I can define myself as this, like,
that was the art of it.
Like I'm the Andy Warhol of film,
right.
Like
it is a Campbell soup. Like he didn't design the Campbell soup.
Right. And he then started to, with tongue in cheek, plagiarize a lot of different other things. He would say things in interviews.
I see. I played a wrong note, so now I'm going to play that same note every measure.
Exactly.
We know that one.
So in an interview, he said this moment was transformational for him, and it turned him to performance art. He wanted to dive more into that. So this is when he was an actor in Nymphomaniac.
Yep.
Did you ever see that movie?
I did. Well, to be fair, I tried to watch all of it. It's long.
Yeah.
And it's boring. Surprisingly, it's like super lurid. There's tons of sex, but it does kind of get boring.
It's so boring. It is super boring. There's not a minute of that movie that I could be entertained by. So.
I was interested at first because the whole thing is like this gal is telling her story to this older guy, and so, anyways, it does get boring.
Right? Yeah, it was very boring,
and it's so long, like unnecessarily long.
Yeah. So and it was it has all these stars in it. So
but it was quote unquote. Well, I wouldn't even put quotes. It was brave of him to do this because it's first of all like it's in a sex movie. It's a very foreign-y movie. It's totally non-traditional, and so here goes this kid star then doing all these pop movies to doing that. It's a big leap.
A better movie in that vein is Shame with
Shame is amazing.
With Fassbender.
Well, Shame has a tight, concise narrative to it.
But it's in that similar lurid vein.
Yeah.
You can make a good movie, because anyway.
But it's, I wouldn't put it on him. He was trying to do something.
No. He's an actor. He's not, it is. But at the premiere, he wore a bag on his head.
I'm not famous or something.
I'm not famous anymore.
Right. I'm not famous anymore. I remember seeing photos at the time, and I thought, that's clever. I like it.
And in a press conference, he said, the seagulls follow the trawler. When the seagulls follow the trawler, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea.
Okay.
And then he stormed out.
Okay.
So I think what's happening in his head is, I hate myself, but I also need to be the center of attention.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to manage that. And I feel like when I was 18, I could kind of relate to that feeling of, I don't want to be the center of attention, but I do want to be the center of attention.
Yeah.
I don't want to be shamed, and I'm insecure, and I don't want anyone to look at me because I don't want to be self-conscious about like what my hands are doing. Like he's always the thing. What do I do with my hands? Well,
I still had that. We talked about this. I still had that when I first started playing out, and in fact, for a while I was playing on stage. Because I both wanted the adulation, and I also don't want any comments. I don't. I want both things at the same time.
So if you're not famous anymore, and you don't want to be thought of as famous anymore, why would you wear a paper bag on your head that says I'm not famous anymore?
Right.
It's a a contradiction.
Yeah.
And I think he's smart enough to kind of get that,
Yes, and in fact,
but troubled enough to do it.
right.
Then he, in the same year, started the hashtag I Am Sorry project.
I remember that. Yeah.
He was, I think, apologizing for the things he had done. And he sat alone in a room with the same paper bag over his head in Los Angeles in an art space. And visitors could visit one by one. You would stand in line.
Yep.
And for 5 days, he sat in this room, and you could go into the room and sit with him and do whatever you wanted to him.
Yep.
And one journalist asked him and wrote about it, I think in some online article. She asked him to take the bag off because she's like, "Are you really Shia LaBeouf? I can't," because he just sat there. He wouldn't really say anything. And he took the bag off, and he was crying and in a lot of distress.
Oh.
And so you would imagine that this is another punishment kind of thing he's doing.
Yeah.
I am sorry. Maybe
And
even
wasn't he also wearing like very little, like he had a...
in the picture I saw, he had like a suit on or something.
Oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
But who was he apologizing to? You know, to his dad, to the world, like this. I hate myself. I'm sorry, and it's kind of an interesting thing because I think it's an effort for him to make art, which is legit. He can make art, and it is art. It's pretty interesting art when you think about it, and also when you step full method, because method is you become the thing.
Yep.
And if you are trying to exercise your demons and you want to do it through various different activities, one of which being I am so sorry, then this might be a good way to do it. And you could just imagine him going full method while he's sitting there with that bag on his head. And you can actually see the picture of she says, "Can I take a picture of you?" And he's just crying, staring into her eyes.
Was the other one, didn't he do a thing where he was in a theater watching himself?
Yeah, that was a different thing.
But he was crying in that one.
Well, he would occasionally cry, because he was, I'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But he said in an interview later after this thing that he was raped by one of the visitors.
He was sexually abused by someone, yes.
Yeah. And they shut it down because of that.
Yeah.
But my God.
I think at the time, that one confused me a little bit. I mean, obviously there's something innovative when someone just does something new in the world. However, that one to me definitely had more of those under or even overtones of like, wait, is this a cry for help? Like that, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, it's like,
Yeah, I think it was. I think it's all those things. Next year, he's in Fury, which I love.
I haven't seen that, but I've heard great things.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's got kind of a ridiculous ending, and it has a ridiculous middle part where they visit with these two German ladies.
By the way, Brad Pitt is another one of the actors for me who a lot of times is still just Brad Pitt in a role. Sometimes he's transcended that for me, but not all the time.
Yeah,
I don't know if he gets there. Like even in Inglourious Basterds, which is a movie I love and is super entertaining.
Yeah,
Brad Pitt always takes me a little bit out of it. In spite of how fun and entertaining it is.
He's hit or miss. Like Burn After Reading, amazing.
Yeah.
12 Monkeys, amazing.
Yeah.
Other kind of early movies, amazing. But then you
Fight Club, amazing.
Yeah, Fight Club, amazing.
But there's certain roles that he's just like really good at doing. Although I will say in Seven, which is another amazing movie, that one was borderline because he was great. But the problem is you're sitting there comparing him to Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
And it's like, but he was great in that. Anyways, I'm digressing.
So Shia LaBeouf in Fury, he goes full method.
Yeah.
And he famously went for days without bathing. And
I remember hearing about how smelly he was. Yes.
And he had a front tooth of his shaved down because he wanted it to look like he had been smacked in the face from a recoil of a gun.
Wow. And he couldn't just wear a thing. Okay.
And he also thought his face scar makeup wasn't convincing enough, so he actually sliced his face open.
Wow.
And he kept opening it up as they were filming because they film over weeks, right?
Unbelievable. That is damaging.
Right. It's one thing to gain weight and lose weight.
Which is unhealthy enough. Like,
Right.
that's scary enough.
But slicing your face open and shaving a tooth down.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And then he was in Sia, the Elastic Heart video.
I love that.
Yeah, I really liked it too. But did you know there was an outcry afterwards?
I know that there were a lot of outcries related to Sia and her use of Massey. What's her name?
The kid?
Maddie. Like, for example, in her Chandelier video, which I love. That song is so good. Anyways, there was an outcry because some people were like, oh, they're sexualizing this little preteen.
Right.
I didn't feel that way. I thought it was a beautiful video.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah.
But there was this huge outcry, of course, and she had to publicly apologize.
And then I didn't know about this one. I don't know what the...
Well, it was Shia and this preteen girl are in these kind of...
In the bubbles, yeah.
They're like these kind of nude leotard things.
Yeah. And then they're kind of S&Ming a little bit.
And I get it. If some people are triggered by it, totally get it. But as I'm watching it, I'm not thinking the message is to sexualize a child.
No, I actually got like this big brother, little sister vibe from it.
Well, what I got from it was... What did I get from it? I mean, obviously, because the little girl is kind of the star of the video.
Yeah.
And I got it from it like Sia is saying, this is me or something.
Yeah.
And Shia is like this other spirit. I thought of it as like...
Two parts of the same.
Yeah, spirits that are interacting.
I really liked it. I thought it was beautiful. I thought he was very good in it and brave to be in it. I'm sorry there was controversy. Wasn't there a controversy with Sia recently about her recent movie?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay. Let's not. Even
it was
go into
another.
Yeah.
It was another kid thing. I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so then same year, during 2014, during a Broadway performance of Cabaret with Alan Cummings, I believe, and Michelle Williams, he was extremely drunk and smoking inside the theater, and he stood up and shouted at the actors, and he went up on stage during the show.
Oh, he wasn't in the show. He was watching it.
He was in the audience.
What?
Goes up shouting at the actors from the audience, gets up on stage, slaps Alan Cummings on the butt, and is like holding his butt on stage. He spent the night in jail.
Oh my gosh.
And he pled guilty to disorderly conduct.
Okay, that is narcissism.
Well, that's like a bigger version of what you did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, I've had a lot of fantasies, maybe not so much now, but I used to have fantasies where whenever I was in a big meeting or big room, auditorium, or at a concert or at a big, whatever, just in a big room with a lot of people, these fantasies of like, man, I wish I was this powerful superhero and I could go up on stage, and at first everyone would be like, hey, you don't belong up there, get out. But then I would float up and be like, you don't understand. There's an asteroid coming and I'm the only one who can save you, or something along. There's variants of this. But it was always this, the theme was, I would go up and at first everyone would boo and be against me because I don't belong up there.
But then you'd show them.
Then I would show them. So it's like that. He actually did it.
Yeah.
And then ended up in jail.
Next
Imagine
year,
if I went up and I'm like, it's okay, there's an asteroid coming. I'm the only one that can save you.
I can float.
Oh, wait, I didn't float. Oh, shoot.
Get off the stage. 2015, LaBeouf sets up a live stream of his heartbeat.
Whoa, I didn't hear about this.
Yeah. Then he did the filming.
Okay.
Or no, wait. That's later. He filmed 30 minutes of seemingly improvisational acting in front of a green screen. You've seen that.
Yes. Is that the one where he says, just do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the podwife, Stacy, I showed her this years later. Like, it came out 6 years ago, but I showed her this to her like a couple years ago. And it's mesmerizing. It's like, it's 30 minutes of him. There's bits of it, and if you haven't seen it, you gotta Google it. It's very motivational.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I don't know if I saw all 30 minutes. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But the takeaway I saw, like, if he wanted a career as a motivational speaker,
yeah,
he's got it.
Yeah, or like an evangelical preacher.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it was like a Tony Robbins thing,
Right.
Like on steroids, but still.
Yeah, it's one of the inside jokes with me and Stacy is he does this thing where I can't, I'm going to do it in person, but I'm going to describe it to you in podcast land, is he's like, and he has his hands in front of his body, and he's just like, he's so intense on trying to tell everyone to live your dreams.
Yeah.
And he puts his fingers in his palm of his hands, and he's just like, and he doesn't know what to do with his hands. He just do it. I don't know. It's so great.
Yeah, because he's trying to say something like, just grab all those things you want to do and put away your fears, and then put it, but he doesn't put it together, and then he's just like, just do it.
Because it's so like improvisational, and then everyone memed it to death after that. Then he watched all of his movies in order and live.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah,
yes.
So he cried at times during the watching. He was arrested for public intoxication in Austin, Texas, and then he had an altercation with his then girlfriend, actress Mia Goth, in Germany. It was caught on camera, and he was probably drunk, and he said to strangers, "If I had stayed over there with her, I would have killed her." He says.
Jeez, man.
So now we're starting to get into, now it's not just drunken, antics where it's bad. Now it's starting to look like abuse, which we'll get into in a second. 2016, he does #TakeMeAnywhere. He tweeted his geographical coordinates daily, and fans would find him, pick him up, and take him anywhere.
Talk about danger to self.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And he has like stories about that. So because of the abuse he went through, might be attracted to self-harm.
And a random stranger showing up to potentially rape him.
Yeah. And desperate to gain approval of people.
Yeah.
2017, he set up a camera at a museum. Do you remember this whole thing?
Yeah.
He will not divide us with Donald Trump. And then trolls online, there's that's actually a pretty long story that I won't go into, but okay, so now let's get to the beginning of Honey Boy. He's in Savannah, Georgia, and he's super drunk, and he asks a cop for a cigarette. The cop said no, and then he gets into some kind of verbal or physical altercation with the cop and someone else. I've actually seen this video.
And he's white, so he just ends up in jail.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They try to arrest him. He runs off. There's a video of him getting arrested, and he's swearing. It's a racist rant. He's bragging about his millionaire lawyers, like, I'm going to get off. I have millionaire lawyers. You can take me to jail, but And he's calling the cops bitches and whores multiple times. And he says at some point, you've got a president. So he's saying to one of the black police officers, you've got a president who doesn't give a shit about you, and you're stuck in a police force that doesn't give a fuck about you. So you want to arrest what? White people who give a fuck? So he's basically saying to this black cop, I'm on your side, and you're going to arrest me, even though he's the one breaking the law.
Well, I didn't know that he said racist stuff.
And then at one point he says, you're going to hell, straight to hell, bro. You especially, Devin. And then they ask, why are you singling out Devin? And he says, because he's a black man.
Or did he mean it because you're betraying your own people? Or something?
Yeah, that's what he's, I think, saying. So that was the racist part of it. It wasn't like he was using the N-word or,
Yeah, because he didn't strike me that way. But anyways, he was very drunk and saying crazy things.
Yeah. He's arrested and charged with disorderly conduct, obstruction, and public drunkenness. He submitted a formal apology later on Twitter. He says, I am deeply ashamed of my behavior and make no excuse for it. I don't know if these statements are too frequent or not shared enough, but I am certain that my actions warrant a very sincere apology to the arresting officers, and I'm grateful for their restraint. I'm grateful for their restraint.
Yeah, he gave an interview in some talk show where he said that he's actually kept in touch with the cop that arrested him.
He says, my outright disrespect for authority is problematic, to say the least, and completely destructive, to say the worst. It is a new low. A low, I hope, is a bottom. So now he's starting to talk in that AA language of like, maybe I've hit bottom. He was sued by one of the bartenders he interacted with that night for $5 million. Now, at this point, the court convicts him and gives him a chance. You either go to prison for 7 years or you go to therapy. And he chose to go to therapy. And this is the basis of Honey Boy.
Prison for 7 years.
Yeah. I mean, who knows if he would have been convicted, sentenced to 7 actual years. But So he was ordered to attend a 10-week rehab program, which I find to be not long enough.
Yeah.
Which we'll get into later. But so at this point, he's diagnosed with PTSD in the rehab program, and they depict this in the movie Honey Boy. Where
By the way, how does a person in the real world go to a 10-week rehab?
What do you mean? Like they can't afford it?
Yeah, and they lose their job, and they, you know.
Right. Yeah. It happens though, because when you hit bottom, you often lose your job. And some jobs will let you go. They'll say, okay, you know, we'll give you 10 weeks. And this is when he is given prolonged exposure therapy, which I'm often talking about.
Yeah.
People, when they think of trauma therapy, they often think of cognitive processing, or they think of EMDR. And I'm always like, you know, there's this thing called prolonged exposure that is pretty effective. I don't use the strict protocol because I find it to be too rigid. I mean, I certainly can do the strict protocol of prolonged exposure. I use an adaptive form of it.
So what aspect about it was prolonged exposure?
So what prolonged exposure is, and all the forms of therapy, EMDR and cognitive processing, are all based on the same principle, which is that when you are traumatized in a certain way and your brain reacts to it in a certain way, you develop PTSD, in that you have this traumatic memory that you avoid. And when it's triggered, you have all the feelings that you had during the incident. So,
Got it.
So you're having a fight or flight response when you're being abused. You encode the memory. Something just barely reminds you of what happened.
And then you
back
feel those things.
You feel all the same feelings. And then you learn, I have to avoid any trigger. I have to avoid anything around that. And I have to kind of shut down my emotional system because I can't cope with my emotions.
Or you go the other direction.
Well, which can happen when you're trying to cope, is people will become very angry and very...
Oh, sorry. What I meant is the prolonged exposure.
Right. So with these various forms of therapy, the idea is habituation. You're trying to habituate the person to the memory because their brain is not used to the memory, essentially. Right. And the way you become used to something is by having the body associate the memory with just sort of background information. Right. The example that's often given is when you have a cat box in your house, you don't smell the cat box anymore because you become nose blind to it. Right. But if you don't have a cat box in your house and you walk in, you instantly smell it.
I have this with my shower right now because in October, the morning when I started having problems, the first symptoms I felt were in the shower. Oh. And so to this day, every morning when I take a shower, I feel triggered. And so I keep telling myself, but you're okay right now. This is okay. Sure.
Right. So over time, if you can manage to become used to that stimulus of being in the shower, and your body associates that with mundane life,
right.
then you will not be triggered the next time you get in the shower.
Right.
So the idea is that with Shia LaBeouf, he goes into therapy. He was traumatized by a lot of violence and seeing violence, and so what they ask you to do is they ask you to talk about what happened while monitoring your distress so that it doesn't go too high, but that you sustain it it's prolonged for a long period of time. And the longer you hold it, because what happens is with trauma is you have these flashes of being reminded and you have this spike in distress, and then you run or you drink or you avoid or something, and then the distress comes down. But what that does is you never habituate to the memory. And you compound the trauma by having yet another trauma that happened later on because you were reminded of the trauma and you had a traumatic reaction to the trauma. So you have to sustain the exposure, but not at a spike level, but at a low hum, if you will. And over time, the more you tell a traumatic story over and over and over and over again at a tolerable level, but at a little bit of distress, and eventually you can tell the story and there's no distress anymore. Yeah. There's no pain.
Which is why I do the podcast.
And being in therapy sometimes has a prolonged exposure element to it, whether it's designed or not, because people will talk about things that happen to them. But anyway, so they depicted this in the movie, and if it was just a 10-week rehab program, in my experience, people with his level of trauma, particularly because it was relational and complex, meaning that it was because sometimes best case scenario, you're traumatized by a stranger. Because at this point, at least you can say, well, I don't know that person. But if you're traumatized by your mom and your dad and the people around you, not only are you traumatized and you're in a fight or flight situation, but now you're also like, I can't, because when you're scared, you want to run to your attachment figures. But if your attachment, right, it complicates everything. And it also complicates the therapy because as a therapist, you want to kind of become like a parental figure to your clients on a certain level.
Right, but then they're afraid of their parental figures.
Right. So he went to a 10-week rehab program, but what he needed was 10 years.
Yeah, of course.
But anyway, and I think he's been in and out of therapy, not just that one time, but
I'm hoping, it seems like writing that movie must have also been very therapeutic in a way.
Yeah, and playing his dad.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was like which the genius and the interesting part to me about this Honey Boy movie is that so in rehab, he starts writing this movie. He starts writing this script.
Yeah.
But it's directly related. It was probably a directive from the therapist.
Yeah, I think I saw an interview with him and that's what he said. It was an exercise and then he took it really seriously.
Right. And the exposure benefits of that for him and also, getting things off his chest and being in the role of his father too, which is interesting. In the role of the abuser, playing him in the movie. That it's got to be really interesting for his therapy.
And playing with both sides of it, playing with his insecurities, playing with humanizing him and showing empathy for his condition too.
Which we'll get into later, but I'm not sure if it worked because it could have made him worse because if this wasn't in a controlled way, it could actually cause problems. I'm not quite sure. I don't know, but
interesting.
Yeah. So then he says that as a result of watching, I already been through that. Okay. So he started writing Honey Boy, and when he got home, because he hadn't seen his dad in 7 years because he had a bad relationship with his dad. But upon writing this movie, he gets out of rehab and he called up his dad and met up with him for the first time.
Yeah.
And he recorded their meeting and it helped him in writing the script.
Right. Apparently he had to lie to him and be like, Mel Gibson will play you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. So after treatment, I think he again gets super drunk because I think he's not or at least he's not compliant with treatment. It sounds like things got the ball rolling with prolonged exposure, but I imagine he either wasn't dedicated enough or had enough aftercare from treatment that he's at a bowling alley and he's super drunk and a bartender refused to serve him French fries because he's like, you're too drunk. And there's a video, of course, of it because there's always people around. And he's shouting at the bartender. Security escorts him out, but he had to return to the bowling alley because why, Berto?
Did he leave his cell phone?
He was wearing the bowling shoes.
Oh, how embarrassing.
So then 2019, Honey Boy comes out, and how many Bertos out of 10?
Oh, I loved it. I'm going to give it a 9.
Wow. Yeah. Really?
And maybe it's because, it touches a lot of nerves, whatever. I just found it, there were a lot of layers to why I found it so great. There were so many moments that I was admiring. Even before I knew that it was semi-autobiographical, I was just like, wow, this is such a good scene. And then as I started realizing what was happening, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's playing his father.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It was just great. So it did so many good things for me. Now, on the one hand, I was thinking there are some little parts about it where I thought, okay, I think the narrative structure, in other words, it's not very traditional in its narrative structure.
It doesn't really have a plot.
Right? And that happened with Boyhood, and I loved Boyhood.
Yeah.
So this is one of those where I could see why someone might not love it but for me, it just hit all those, and there were so many precious moments with the layers, and the little boy did so well, and the
little boy was amazing.
So
Noah Jupe is his name. I would have given the first half hour an 8 or a 9. The last half of the movie, I'd give like a 6. I thought it was good, certainly serviceable, but I just kind of lost interest. It felt like it
could see that a
dragged.
bit.
But the first half hour, anytime him and the father and son were interacting, I was gripped. It was well acted, well written, well directed, but particularly because I'm like, this is him telling us what it was like for him. Because a lot of the aspects you're like, this is kind of fantastical. This dad is a piece of work, but he's so specifically a piece of work that it was probably accurate.
Yeah. Well, I guess I wonder if this happened to you. The scenes that took place in the present, like with him as an adult,
right?
I was a lot less engaged by those.
Right.
Still, though, I think for me, and I will just fully admit, I think because it felt so relatable and so maybe re-traumatizing or whatever, but it just felt that has a lot of it going for it for me. I actually had the same thing with Boyhood. That Boyhood, there's so many aspects about that movie where I was like, oh my gosh, I could relate to that moment and that moment and that moment. So because of that, I definitely bump it up, no question. I'm giving it a Berto bump that is a little unusual.
Yeah. All right, 2020, last year, interview, he says, I'm a buffoon. My public outbursts are failures. They are not strategic. They're a struggling motherfucker showing his ass in front of the world. I think that's in response to some people thinking, like, is this some sort of evil genius? Like, all of his antics, is it some kind of manipulation? And he's like, no. These are failures. I'm a buffoon. Right. It has nothing to do with strategery.
Yeah, like I was giving the example before of Joaquin Phoenix, who method acted in public.
Yeah.
And almost not in public for like a year about getting into rap.
Yeah.
And everyone thought he was actually having a breakdown, and he's like, okay, we're going to find out he does something really bad here soon. And then he comes out with a movie, and the movie's actually really entertaining. I'm like, what? That clappo. Yeah. There's something very deliberate about that.
Right. He last year became involved in a physical altercation with a man. He stole his hat and ran away, and he was charged with battery and petty theft.
That's interesting.
And now let's get into the domestic violence, intimate partner violence stuff. So up until this point, I'm like, well, okay, he has a problem with alcohol, and he would talk about it openly in interviews, like on Jimmy Kimmel. He's like, yeah, I had a kind of, and as a problem is it would be made into a joke, kind of like what you're saying earlier.
Yeah.
He'd be talking about how he'd be ranting and raving, and the audience would laugh.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Kimmel would laugh.
Because that's our culture, really. Alcohol is funny.
Yeah.
Being drunk is funny. There's whole movies about it. There's whole characters about it.
Right. Ha 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 ha.
Hangover.
I was so poisoned in my brain that I couldn't think straight, and I was harming other people, and I had to be detained by the police. Ha ha ha.
Think of that. There's the Hangover franchise.
Right. Exactly. So FKA Twigs is a artist that he was involved with. She filed a lawsuit against him for sexual battery and assault, and the lawsuit says that so she was the black girl in Honey Boy.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh.
So in the movie, if you haven't seen,
what?
There's this. Oh. She looks like she's maybe 18-ish or something.
Yeah.
And she befriends little Otis, which is supposed to be little Shia, who's supposed to be like, prepubescent. And they have like a sexual relationship or something, which I was wondering, did Shia get raped by an older woman when he was a kid?
That seems to be the implication.
And the actress that played the girl who rapes this young boy ends up becoming in a relationship with Shia LaBeouf.
Okay, controversial statement. Is there no other word, sexually abused?
Sexually abused?
Yeah, I find something so weird about using the same word for such a wide range of things.
That's fine. I mean, you'll get a lot of arguments from
I
other people.
I know.
Whatever word we use, it needs to be clear that no 12-year-old boy can consent to
no, absolutely. It's absolutely sexually abused. It's just, okay, and then even within there, though, there is the complexities of like, that girl was obviously abused. She was obviously she's way younger than her years meant. Anyways, etc. But whatever the case may be, I thought the same thing. I was like, yeah, this might have happened to him.
Yeah, and actually, the way it was depicted, it was almost depicted apologetically.
Yeah.
Like it. So I don't know what his stance was on how that. Anyway, so they had a 1-year relationship.
And sorry, parentheses. I remember being 13, 12, whatever. At the time, I would know better now, but at the time, having sex with an 18-year-old attractive female, I would have perceived that to be the biggest score in human history.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated.
In fact, I know it is, but I had a friend who literally had that happen to him. He was 13, and he was visiting relatives in the coast, and there was a maid who was like 18, and they had sex.
Yeah.
And we, at my age, we were like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, let's just not go down that road. But 99.9% of the time, it's going to cause damage.
Oh, absolutely. No, of course. I'm not debating that. I'm saying that if this actually happened to him, he probably at the time, like me, when I was 5, I didn't think I was being abused.
Right.
Later on, I learned, I was like, oh.
Do I believe that Shia LaBeouf, even today, might, without a lot of therapy, still think that was a nice thing? Because the way it's depicted, if it happened in real life, is that she listened to him and was nice to him.
Exactly.
But she was also sexually abusive to him.
Yeah, and
I mean, the other thing is it's unclear. She might have been 16. Like, we don't really know, how old that character was.
But still, 16 to 12 is a big difference.
Yeah.
It's just that kids don't know, they just don't.
Right. So,
at least not back then.
The actress, she said in a lawsuit that he abused her a lot, but there's this one incident where he was driving recklessly. He was upset at her, and he removed his seatbelt and threatened to crash the car unless she professed her love for him.
So wait, so is the role in the movie after all this?
No, they met, I believe,
on that set.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So he's upset at her, saying, you got to profess your love for me, and he's driving recklessly, and he threatened to crash the car, took off his seatbelt. So essentially saying, I'm going to kill us both. She said he did things like this often. Once he woke her up in the middle of the night while he was choking her.
Oh, God.
He beat her, and she tried to get away from him another time. He would become jealous if she acknowledged male waiters, and he would force her to avert her gaze when talking to men. And he would impose quotas on how frequently she had to kiss and touch him each day.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, no.
Yes, this is...
he was definitely... Something happened to him. On top of everything else, something happened to him.
But this is not just antics, No. He would insist she sleep naked, and he kept a loaded gun by his bedside as sort of an implied that he would use it against her. He stripped away her self-esteem and self-efficacy, she said. She says, quote, he brought me so low below myself that the idea of leaving him and having to work myself back up just didn't seem possible.
I'm getting Marilyn Manson flashbacks.
I know, right? She alleges that he knowingly infected her with an STD.
Okay.
He shot stray dogs. She says that he shot stray dogs with a gun to get into the character for this film, The Tax Collector.
Oh, my God.
So just think about that one.
Yeah.
Sia came forward and says,
I didn't know any of this.
Right. It's sort of like, how come I didn't know about that? How come he hasn't been Me Too'd? Sia says, I too have been hurt emotionally by Shia, a pathological liar.
What?
Who conned me into an adulterous relationship claiming to be single. So apparently he was with someone else and claimed he was. Songwriter Katie Rose says when she was 14 years old that he, quote, groped me violently at a party in the Hollywood Hills. Carolyn Foe allegedly said that he headbutted her and made her bleed from that. Shia said in response to this, I'm not in any position to tell anyone how my behavior made them feel. I have no excuses for my alcoholism or aggression, only rationalizations. I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me. I have a history of hurting the people closest to me. I'm ashamed of that history and am sorry to those I hurt. There is nothing else I can really say.
That's as close as what anyone in that situation can and should say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and given who he is, I kind of trust that he's being sincere with it because he's just so honest in other situations.
Well, I mean, and there's nothing to be, I mean, he's literally saying, I've abused myself and everyone around me, and especially those closest to me.
Yeah.
He's literally saying that that's what he's done.
Right. So this crosses the line for me of like,
yeah, certainly.
You know, there's one thing if you're Woody Allen and you're making Manhattan. There's another thing if you're sexually abusing your own children in real life. You know, it's one thing if you're Shia LaBeouf and you're, you know, you're method acting and you have some drunken antics in a Walgreens. It's another thing if you're systematically abusing every woman you come into contact with and breaking them down. That's something else.
What would we do as a society? Imagine we had a magic wand where no matter what someone had done, if we waved this magic wand, they would be permanently and 100% absolutely cured of it. Meaning they would never rape again, abuse again, they would never murder again, whatever it was, ever. It's guaranteed. It's magic. Now, what they did, of course. You can't undo that. We don't have that magic. So imagine that you could do that. And then, of course, that they would apologize and whatever it is. What would we do? Like, the sense of putting them in jail now is not about protecting society because the magic stops that. So the jail would be just punitive.
Yeah, so you're commenting, I think, directly or indirectly on cancel culture a little bit.
I'm sort of wondering... I mean, like, at what point can you recover?
Yeah.
And
it's an interesting question, and I don't know if I've ever thought about it until you put it that way, because it's an interesting thought experiment, because, of course, we don't have that magic wand, and I think that's, for me anyway, I'll just say for me, that if what we're seeing here now is a pattern, and he obviously isn't getting the help he needs to get,
right,
which involves sobriety, which isn't easy, but people try.
Yeah.
And he doesn't seem to be trying hard enough or going to therapy with enough people. He's not at that point yet or something, which I can understand. But if you're continually abusing human beings around you,
to the point of physical violence and death threats, and I mean, we've crossed many lines.
Terrorizing, Marilyn Manson kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You're terrorizing people, and that's abhorrent, but you don't seem to be stopping.
Yeah.
This is going to continue to happen, Shia, until major changes happen in how you approach how powerless you are over your addiction and your behavior. And until that happens, you're a criminal on the loose who's continuing to commit crimes, and that's not okay with me.
Yeah.
And if, say, he did do all the things he needed to do and he did recover, it's normal to have some relapses or some emotional issues, maybe a little bit of verbal abuse every now and then to whoever he's in a partnership with. But, it's all under control for the most part. Then, 5-10 years later, as a artist that I would pay money to consume his art, I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
But right now we're not seeing any. I mean, he apologizes. I think he genuinely is ashamed of what he's done, but he's not changing. He's not doing what he needs to do.
Yeah, no question. I mean, look, it's so sad because obviously I had this hope naively. As I said, I didn't know the movie was about him. As I watched the movie and I realized it was about him, then I realized, oh, wait a minute, has he exorcised his demons? And I had this naive hope that, oh my gosh, what an amazing story.
Right.
Out of this maelstrom comes this like very artistic second chapter, second act in his career. And that's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
I'm excited.
I thought, oh, he's turned a corner. This is great. And then when I started looking after the movie, I looked more into what's happened in the past couple of years, and I'm like, oh, it's possible that he got worse because of that. That happens sometimes. I don't know, but that will happen sometimes, that when you go halfway in to prolonged exposure or any kind of trauma therapy and you don't go the full mile, you actually will make it worse because you unearth all those demons and you haven't resolved
they're still
them.
unearthed.
Yeah. So now, following the success of Honey Boy, Marvel was thinking about giving him a superhero role, which would have been pretty interesting given his, acting style. But Marvel has pulled out of that deal.
Yeah.
He landed a coveted role in the upcoming thriller Don't Worry, Darling, which was Olivia Wilde's follow-up to Booksmart.
Oh.
But then in September, he was replaced by Harry Styles, which is a bummer because Harry Styles is no Shia LaBeouf.
Who's Harry Styles again?
He was in that British boy band, One Direction.
Oh, okay. That's why I don't know him.
Yeah.
All right.
He's, he had a minor role in Dunkirk.
Oh.
He was.
Okay.
He would have been one of the.
I think I know what he looks like.
One of the soldiers. Yeah. But reportedly, due to his on-set behavior, and possibly because of the report by FKA Twigs, he, was so it looks like he might be getting some comeuppance in the industry. So here's my conceptualization, Berto. Trauma. Throughout his childhood, attachment issues, nervous system issues, almost constant fight or flight, freeze, appease, faint, constant adrenaline, distress, lack of trust in other people. He's very needy of love and attachment, but not getting any of his attachment needs. He's watching his parents fight all the time. He has PTSD from violent trauma and from relational trauma. And at first, he tries to please others. He tries to please his parents. And this is depicted in Honey Boy. He's a very good boy.
Yep.
He's very accommodating to both of his crazy parents. And he is accommodating to filmmakers. He's accommodating to the public. And he, acts well, and he wants to do a good job. He's trying to do a good job by everyone, and this gives him some temporary relief.
What's that, preoccupied?
Right, exactly. And some.
Yeah, I got it right.
Right. And when he was drunk and saying, "I'm going to crash the car," that's also a preoccupied kind of move. Not all preoccupied. # not all preoccupied. So he gets some temporary relief, but not really, right? He's got all that tension inside of him, all that distress, but he's learning if I'm wonderful on stage, if people look at me and they approve of me, then I at least get some of my attachment needs met. So I need to stay in the limelight. As an adult, he learns that drinking actually helps him to feel okay, numbs the pain. It works, but sometimes he would drink too much. And I think that's what he had I think the antics we would see were the accidental overdoses, because that happens on alcohol. Like usually when people drink, they want a good buzz or they want a good numb feeling. Yeah. They want a relaxation. They don't want to become so hammered they don't remember anything the next day. That's not the goal, at least when you're not, in college or something. And so I'm guessing that occasionally he would accidentally drink too much, which of course happens. The ability to know if you're too drunk or not gets turned off when you are too drunk. Then the anger would come out because your prefrontal cortex shuts down, and the desperation would come out, and it would emerge in these public arenas, and he would be seen on camera. It was more and more. He has more shame, compounds the trauma, more pain, more anger, more of the self-loathing, more of the desperation to just get through the day, and more efforts to try to avoid himself in method acting, in slicing his own face. It's interesting that in order to be method in Fury, he slices his face open and breaks one of his teeth. There are other ways to method act other than to self-abuse, right?
Doesn't he understand in that moment that the next role will have a scar and a broken tooth?
Yeah.
So how can he method act that?
Yeah. Someone should give him a role of someone that goes to therapy for 10 years and is good to themselves and doesn't drink. And then he can method act that. But anyway, and probably many commitments along the way to change. I'm guessing that throughout, his adult life, there were many moments where he's just like, I need to figure something out. This is not working out for me. but no proper treatment.
A lot of rock bottoms, so to speak.
Yeah, no proper treatment, or his authority issues, getting in the way, the complex trauma getting in the way of his ability to, there's that one scene in Honey Boy where the therapist is like, "Are you lying to me right now? Are you acting right now?"
Yeah.
She says, and he says, "Yes and no."
Yes and no, yeah.
And I thought that was so brilliant because it was played that way. I'm like, well, I bet you he is kind of acting right now, but I also think he's probably being honest right now. It was a weird, place for him. He's forced into treatment.
Because he goes in and he says, doesn't he say, thank you for, because this was the scream therapy.
Right.
Thank you for that. That has really opened me up to blah, 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 whatever.
Right. And she's like, are you acting? He's like, yes and no.
Yeah.
So he's forced into treatment and he begins the process, but it's a 10-week process and there's no proper follow-up, is my speculation. Or he wasn't really ready to continue the work. He's not ready for sobriety or something. And he escalates. His shame gets worse. His alcoholism gets worse. When he's drunk, his prefrontal cortex turns off more and more of his demons are coming up. He's desperately trying to get his attachment needs met. And the kinds of things I'm hearing are pretty classic abusive behavior from a person who is desperately trying to get their attachment needs met. Because like you're with your girlfriend and you're getting on each other's nerves. Yep. And you have this thought of, I'm being rejected right now. She doesn't like me. Is she going to leave me? And if you drink a bit to cope with that, your prefrontal cortex becomes a little foggy and you're like, well, and you do a little gesture of like, hey, we're in love, right? We're together. I'm safe with you, right? And, FK Twigs is like, I don't know. And then it triggers you more, and then you drink more, and then you lose control more, and then by the end of it, you're, careening down a road saying, I'm going to crash the car. Yeah. Doesn't justify it, but I've seen this happen a lot.
Man, I just think back to that when I was like 19 and how I didn't know I had these things in me, and I had these relationships with girls where really I'll call it the problem was on their side of the fence, not on my side of the fence, where it's like, oh geez, this person's got issues. But then, so I was unaware, and then I enter into a relationship where I'm so preoccupied and I'm so like possessive and controlling. And I hadn't seen that coming at all because I hadn't done or been that way in any previous relationship, But I think it was because in the previous relationships, well, there hadn't been that many, I had sought out people with problems, and their problems were so dominating that it didn't give me a chance to become a problem myself. And then when I finally started going out with someone that actually has problems, but maybe not as severe, and then I'm like, oh, hey, it's my chance to shine. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think that this is a very common story that I've seen a lot clinically, his story, the one that I'm conceptualizing. I don't know if it's true. We'd have to know from him, but I've seen this a lot, but they just aren't famous people.
Yeah.
What the difference is Shia LaBeouf is super famous, and so we get to see blips along the way.
Yep.
But this story is very common. The relational traumas, the pain, the distress, the PTSD, the drug addiction, the chaos, the relationship problems, the unfair behavior, the desperation that leads to unfair behavior, and violence, and verbal abuse and control of other people, the occasional dips into therapy and not being ready for the full Monty of therapy, and struggling with self-hatred and just trying to survive one day at a time while trying to preserve at least some level of integrity or self-esteem. It's a very, very common story, but one we just don't normally see so public.
That's interesting you say that. Actually, I'm realizing one thing, which is when it comes to, so imagine someone that works a normal day-to-day job, maybe they work in construction. So there's someone you see out on the road holding a flag or hammering something, whatever. And they have had abuse problems. They've been abusive. They've been to therapy, but they had some bad problems. So like, it's someone who, if they had painted a work of art, you would now be questioning whether you would buy that work of art. But when you drive by, first of all, you have no idea what their background is. So you don't care that they're maintaining your road. But even if you did, what would you do? Would you say, you're no longer allowed to maintain this road because of your past? It's such a weird, interesting thing. Now, obviously there's cases where if they're still offending, well, they belong somewhere where they can't, in therapy, in jail, in what, something, right? And obviously if there's a victim in the equation, they definitely need to be protected. But I'm thinking more about how this weird difference we have with famous people and the average people of the world.
Well, I think part of it is we have this idea that famous people are so elevated by their riches and fame, and we participate in that by sending money their way, that we don't want to participate in that. The construction person, I guess we're indirectly sending money to them by maybe buying whatever condo that they're building, but we don't look at that person and say they're better than, maybe that's part of it, is like, well, this would be an interesting psychological experiment, actually, where you could ask people a bunch of questions. And I wonder if it's based on how we see ourselves in relation to that person. If they're below us, if we think of them as being below us, then we wouldn't cancel them. But if we see them being above us, then we might get some schadenfreude and some motivation to try to tear them down.
Yeah, like what if it were not someone that because you're right, like, I pay taxes, but fine. It's a store owner, a local store owner. They're not a millionaire. They just own a little mom and pop shop. You go there, you just buy little things. And then you find out that they had a past. Now, see, first point is you wouldn't find that out. Yeah. That's the first point, because they're not on the tabloids.
Well, let's say you did.
But
how far in the past?
So, I mean, both parts are interesting.
Are they still doing it?
Because part of the thing is we're not looking into it.
Yeah.
The reason we're not looking into it is because they're not famous.
Right.
Now, if we were looking into it, then the next question is, okay, should we not buy from their store now?
Right.
Now, we clearly do it in some cases when it's like, well, they don't sell to gay couples. Okay, then it gets on Twitter, and then
more analogous for my thinking is if he was currently, if there was evidence or indication that he was currently abusive to his wife.
Absolutely, right? Then you'd be like, well, I can't. First of all, I hope something gets happened. Maybe I can report it. What do I do? And I'm definitely not going to go to buy stuff from him.
Right, I wouldn't.
Absolutely.
But if it was 10 years ago.
And more importantly, if they've done something, like they did the therapy, they've recovered. Now what?
Then I would go to the store.
Right? So then what happens with the artist after they've recovered and they've done the work?
Well, the problem is with a lot of the cancellations that we've seen, the Kevin Spaceys and the Harvey Weinsteins, and
they don't recover.
They don't recover. Yeah. They've got worse over time.
In fact, they argue that they're innocent.
Right.
Yeah. So fair enough.
So we don't really have a good example.
We don't have examples
of people who reformed before they were discovered. Because a lot of these guys will reform after they'll say they reformed, but we don't have a really good. I mean, maybe the best example is Liam Neeson. And he wasn't exactly canceled.
Actually, I remember that. But I remember that he said he would walk around with a stick, looking to beat up
brown people. Yeah,
and he was so ashamed of it.
Yeah, he was really ashamed.
And then he nearly got canceled for saying that story.
Right.
And it was like, well, and I really felt strongly about this. No.
He's the good one.
You have to let people tell their stories of how they were. Like when I tell my stories.
Yeah.
About how today I told a couple of horrible stories. I honestly, okay, sure, there is a part of it that is self-therapy for me, but I'm honestly doing it because like my motto has become like, let me fuck up so you don't have to, like I'll make the mistake so you don't have to. But the point is that I'm not telling you this because I'm still like this or I still want to be like this. No, I'm like, wow, this is what can happen to someone when they have abuse, when they have things, and that was what Liam Neeson was trying to do. And
I think for Liam Neeson though, because I've watched the whole interview like a couple times, he didn't come out strong enough. The way it came out at like half baked, you know.
Could be. Yeah.
But at the same time, he was absolutely looking back on something and saying it was horrific that he did it.
And it took a lot of courage for him to do that because he must have known that there could be backlash.
I don't know. I don't know what he thought. I
guess that's where I feel if we want to make more progress, we need to, even though it's painful and annoying and weird, we almost need to applaud those things more, to say, you know what?
Well, there's a version of applause.
Yeah.
There's, like Mr. Rogers, we can applaud. Like, we can stand up and applaud. Okay.
Yeah.
The Liam Neeson, we can say, well, that's horrific, Liam, and I agree with you.
Thank you for being a an example.
I'll applaud your change and your self-awareness.
Yes.
But what you did, Liam, was
terrible,
awful. But I applaud you. That's the version of applause.
Yeah.
And with we've been asked to talk about cancel culture in the past, and I don't think and in the past I was like, well, if someone does something stupid, they deserve to be canceled, which I still believe, but I don't think I fully appreciated just how toxic the internet has become.
Yeah.
As I've become a little bit more famous over the past year or two, I've started to experience like moments of that.
Yeah.
Probably not moments that people know about listening right now, because there's just little moments that happen here and there on YouTube or something. Like, I'll tell one moment. I was reacting to one of the videos, I don't know, a year ago or something, and I misspoke, and I remember knowing I misspoke in the moment. But, when I'm reacting, I'm saying all sorts of stuff, like I have to think off the top of my head. I don't have notes in front of me. I never think about what I'm going to say. I just start yammering,
Yeah.
And I said something, and I tripped over my words, and essentially what I said was that I essentially said something to the effect of, there's a degree of sexual trauma and there's a threshold upon which you legitimately have PTSD, and below that threshold you don't have PTSD, or something like that, which I don't believe.
Yeah.
I do. I early on, way before anyone, way before the DSM, and the DSM still isn't sufficient, but way long ago, I discovered in my travels with clients that anything can trauma someone. Like, you don't traumatize someone. You don't know what's going to traumatize. Right. Like, you have this idea of like, oh, it has to be this, it has to be that. No, like someone can be traumatized by going to the doctor for a checkup because of the way the body just perceives the situation.
Right.
Like, you just don't know what trauma is going to look like and how it's going to come at you, particularly anyway. So I don't believe that, but somehow it came out of my face that way, and I didn't catch it as I was saying. Because, when you say literally thousands and upon thousands of words, occasionally you're going to say a sentence that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And people went berserk, but I didn't know it, Berto, until 3 weeks ago.
Right. Someone
sent me this thing saying, like, and it makes me sweat just thinking about it. God, what was it? Someone said, I don't know if have I talked about this in the podcast?
I don't know if you've talked, I think you told me, but you didn't, I don't think you mentioned it. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't want to go into the whole story because I actually thought about saying this whole story. Long story short, there were hundreds of people on Reddit, I don't know, dozens, who hated me and were completely 1,000% convinced that I was promoting the idea that you do not have legitimate traumas for your PTSD. They thought that I believed that, and they didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. They didn't look into my track record. They didn't look into the thousands of other times I've said otherwise. And they just took this one kind of, and it was a flub. It was obviously a flub of a sentence. I didn't come out and say, "Let me declare." It was like, blah, 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 and it was this weird sentence, and it wasn't even clear what I meant by it. They were interpreting it a certain way. And it was a mistake for sure, and a stupid thing to say. I'm not saying it wasn't, but anyone that knows me would have known, oh, he didn't mean to, he said that, but he doesn't mean that because he said, anyway. And so I got a little glimpse of that, of like, what if this had been worse?
How the tide can turn. Yes.
And what if the tide what if some famous person took up that tide? I'd be over.
Yeah.
Or if YouTube saw it and said, let's take
no
his channel away, or so, like, and I realize now what some people were asking me a few years ago when they're like, Kirk, what do you think of cancel culture? Do you think it's out of control? And back then I'm like, no, it's fine. And now,
you and I had a little debate about it, but because I remember where you were coming from, which was, I still think a good sentiment, which is like, we needed some of that movement.
Yeah. Yeah, the biggies, the Harvey Weinsteins, the Bill Cosbys, these are people that need to be canceled. But I think along the way, we're also getting this other element. And with Shia LaBeouf, for example.
Sounds like he's still an active offender.
Yeah, and I think by my morals, he is worthy of cancellation. Is he worthy of being decanceled if he proves himself for a number of years? And we hear from his partners that he's a nice enough guy, because that's, I think, the kicker is like,
right.
I need a public report from one of his girlfriends that he has turned a new leaf.
Still though, and I do really agree with you. It's just, I find it fascinating because we'll never get those public reports about not famous people, and we'll still do business and transact with them all the time.
But if we did, we wouldn't.
Right. But
what am I supposed to do? Go to the Safeway and ask the owner?
We don't.
But we can't.
We don't.
Well, we can't.
Right, but the life goes on. It's kind of weird. It's like we've allocated this special role for celebrities both ways, and I think it's just that I'm not even saying it's right or wrong. It's the nature of the beast.
I see.
With great power,
it's just kind of interesting.
Great responsibility.
It's just kind of interesting.
That not only will you be given unmeasurable wealth and notoriety, if you screw up, nowadays especially, the microscope will be on. And in some cases, it's totally deserved.
Yeah.
We'll
also note that some people are protected from cancellation because of their privilege, either they're white or whatever. So,
and for the longest time, celebrities were in fact protected.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which is another irony. Is like, they're being canceled now and maybe over-canceled in some situations, but for so long, and I think still to some extent, they're protected because of the fact that
like it took so much for a celebrity to used to be, really taken down or something.
Yeah, literally decades of reports that, reach a critical mass. Yeah. Anyway, final word on Shia LaBeouf, Berto. Can you relate to him?
I can definitely relate to him. I feel a sense of sadness, of course, for his victims, like the people around him, especially her. And I also feel sadness for him. I was really looking at this and I felt excited. I felt excited for his story. I was like, wow, you're going to come out of this stronger than ever. And I can't wait to see what you do. And I guess I'm still hoping, but he's going to have to then really do a lot of work, apologize, make amends, and never and stop offending and stop hurting stop.
Right. What I would hope for him, I think, given my loose speculation about his situation, is he needs years of team-based therapy, sobriety, and prolonged exposure, some sort of trauma therapy. He probably also would benefit by taking a break from acting for 5 years.
Yeah.
Because the stress of that and the traveling always interferes with sobriety and therapy. And really dedicating himself, he needs to be sober. Bottom line, I cannot see a world in which he can drink and function. And he also needs, with his maybe another therapist to work on his attachment issues. And then he needs to venture into a relationship, because he's probably never had a functional relationship in his life. And we know that if you've never had that, it's hard to build one. So he needs to be through a number of years of therapy as he navigates attachments in a healthy way. And then he can start entering into the limelight again and do whatever he wants, maybe artsy stuff, whatever. And then there needs to be a honest public report from his partner that, he messes up, but he's doing really good. I know he did some terrible things to previous women, but he seems like he's really trying. He's been sober, and then he can, he could have a wonderful career after that.
And then we'll enjoy his movies.
Or he can continue to drink and spiral downward, and God knows what'll happen to him. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.